Hello and welcome to this session on how to optimize your networks for UCaaS. I am Finbarr Begley, analyst from the Cavell Group, joined today by Mattias Ohde from Destiny for Service Providers and Greg Zweig from Ribbon. Nice to meet you both.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Yeah.
So we're here today to obviously talk about networks and UCaaS. We're going to assume people who are joining this talk know what UCaaS is. But why don't we start with a bit of an understanding of what both of your companies are doing, how you're working in the UCaaS market, how you relate to it. Why don't we start with you, Mattias?
Sure. So I'm here representing Destiny for Service Providers. So what we are doing is actually what our name says. We are serving service providers with a UCaaS solution, which you can buy as a service or you can buy it as a software, depending on the needs from the customers. But our customers are mostly telcos, but also smaller service providers locally but all around the globe, of course, mainly Europe, but we have customers all over, I would say.
And Greg, I think you're based out of the US, aren't you?
I am based out of the U.S. Work for Ribbon Communications. For any of the audience who's less familiar with us, we're about a 4-year-old brand, but we're made up of a number of companies with probably 50 years of communications experience. So Ribbon includes what was Sonus Networks, GenBand, which includes the Nortel acquisition they did way back in 2010. Edgewater Networks, and most recently ECI Telecom, originally based in Israel. We're about 4,000 employees today, and we do business in roughly 140 countries around the globe. And we do business with most of the major telecom providers globally, who serve a lot of enterprise customers, and then we do some business directly with enterprises as well. Now, unlike Mattias, we're not a UCaaS provider per se. I would think of us more as a UCaaS enabler. So we make things like application servers, session border controllers, and other elements of the core networks and edge networks. And we help both UCaaS providers, someone like a Mattias, as well as individuals, migrate to the cloud. So we have a variety of products and services in that regard.
Okay, that's good. So we've got a UCaaS provider, we've got a UCaaS enabler, two companies both perfectly sourced to help us deal with this topic today, which is great. So I guess, maybe going back to you, Greg, and then to Mattias, just to talk about, when you think about UCaaS and the network, how are those two currently interacting at the moment from your perspective and your solutions? Are you seeing things hosted in clouds? Are they being hosted on people's networks? What is the structure of that?
Well, I guess the answer is all of the above. I think obviously there's a massive migration to the cloud for services today, and we support that in kind of two different ways. So we have as a service models for service providers and for enterprises, and we do things like white label solutions. But we also allow resellers and enterprises to deploy our solutions in the cloud, in an Azure, an AWS, or Google Cloud. And actually, here in just a few weeks ago, we were one of the first vendors. We announced a standard-based cloud-native enterprise SBC that's based on Kubernetes and Docker. So, we see, I think, particularly post-COVID, the cloud really is dominating the deployment model. And I think as we move forward, for someone like a Mattias, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think we also see this migration from traditional network infrastructure for service providers to cloud-native deployed solutions.
Well, has he put words in your mouth, or do you disagree?
No, but I mean that's the same trend as we see, of course. I mean, I can say I've been a customer of myself. Can I say like that? Because
Yeah.
I mean, I'm now in a context where I'm part of the Destiny for Service Providers, which has also. I mean, we did a few acquisitions last year, including the Telepo platform from Mitel, and I used to work for Soluna for more than 10 years being a customer of Telepo. When we started serving the Nordics, and especially Sweden and the other Nordic countries with cloud services, like back in 2007, of course we sold it as a cloud service to the end customer, but we ran it in our own data centers and built the solution from scratch, including, of course, the connectivity parts and the data centers and all the add-on services, which in the end, when you kind of grow that business in volume, but also putting extra services on top, and you kind of build your own environment in that way, of course, it gets more complex. And what we see now is that the demand from service providers all around the globe, I would say, that almost all of the big telcos wants to buy this as a service, as a cloud service from us, or from at least they don't want to run it in their own data centers anymore, because I mean, speed of innovation and the global setup that we now live in makes it harder and harder to kind of run it yourself. And if you want to be in the front end when it comes to innovation and stuff like that, you see that it's a much faster way if you can buy it as a service as well. But of course, then you have the challenge with the history that you started to build something 10 years ago that will also, you have to migrate and be a part of what you want to do in the future as well. So I mean, it's not something that you do in like 6 months, but we see that more and more customers wants to move into cloud-based solution all the way down to running the platform or running the service as well.
Yeah, and I think we're at this very interesting transition point where obviously building something in your own network and your own data centers was the default for a lot of people for a very long time, which, of course, as you get more of a distributed workforce, as you get people in more disparate locations, you're hiring people in different parts of the globe because you just need expertise. Suddenly the latency, which obviously we'll talk about in a minute, very important for UC, starts to increase quite drastically. Whereas if you can build this idyllic sort of cloud-hosted platform that could be on any AWS cluster, for example, then suddenly you're talking about global reach, ability to spin things up wherever things need to be. And I guess in putting that in the context, public, private, self-hosted versus cloud-hosted, what do we feel like the ideal conditions are for building a UCaaS platform now? Where should operators be going? Where should service providers be trying to get to? Greg, do you have maybe some thoughts on that for us?
Well, I think that's a hard question to answer, because I think the real challenge is that every service provider, and maybe this won't sound like an answer, but there's so many differences out there in terms of where people are at in terms of their infrastructure. I mean, you have one of the big challenges. So many service providers have grown through acquisition. So they don't have one network; they might have 3, 4, 5 networks, right? So when this came up recently with Microsoft Operator Connect, right? So Microsoft created a set of standards around Operator Connect, and they provided those to service providers. One I think challenge for Microsoft in doing that is I don't think they fully grasp that a lot of service providers have to build out those environments 4 or 5 times over, because they don't have the same environment in every region. And here in the United States, I can think of a particularly large service provider who's grown through acquisition. They probably have 4 or 5 different billing systems. And I'm sure that if I was to ask Mattias for an example, he would tell me about some pan-European operator that has different infrastructure in every single country, because that's how it was acquired. So I think the hardest thing is to figure out, how do you bring that together? I do think that, moving forward, it's likely that a lot of providers will move to one of the big cloud hosting providers, the AWS, the Azure, Google Cloud, whomever, and start to build assets in a cloud native way. I mean, one of the things that we've been talking a lot about in recent last year or so is, our telco cloud kind of environments where basically everything migrates to a cloud native infrastructure. But that's to be honest, that's a multi-year. Gosh, it might be a multi-decade process, to be honest. I do think that things like UCaaS are very well suited to be outsourced. Providers are using, UCaaS providers like Mattias, or they're using Teams or Zoom or someone else in the equation, because I just don't think that it's practical for someone, unless they're one of the big tier ones, and even they will struggle, for them to keep up with the pace of innovation and roll that out inside their network. Just difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we're talking about a challenge of modernization, really, as well as the networking challenge in terms of.
Yeah, it's not just whether you can get the bits to go from place to place. You also have to deal with billing and all of the, customer service and customer support. When you make a change in your network, you have to have the guys who answer, or gals that answer the tech support line. They need to know what that change means, right? Because somebody's paying for it. So I think sometimes we get enamored by the technology and forget the reality that we're building a whole solution, not just, a screen change.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you go fully cloud, it will still not be. It will be more of a hybrid rather than one solution anyway. Because I mean, for one thing, you have the thing that Greg talks about when it comes to different platforms, different countries, of course, different billing systems, and all. Even, I mean, if you break it down to the more traditional parts like fixed telephony, mobile telephony, I mean, it's still local setups. It doesn't mean that one thing runs in the same way, even if you have one carrier, but they still have different markets and different setups, and each thing works in different ways. And you have traditional stuff that you need to take in perspective, as well as PST and networks and stuff like that. It's not just to put it in the cloud and make it work. It's I mean, when you break it down, it's in many ways quite old fashioned, and the porting of numbers and stuff. But of course, you can start with the easy parts. So of course, things like UCaaS, when it comes to the applications or the services or contact center functionality, or even more add-on functionality like reporting stuff, call recording, all that you can actually put in the cloud, of course. And then in the end, I don't think it matters whether you have it in one of the big ones like Google and Amazon. That would probably more come down to regulations than what you want to do or are allowed to do. Or if you buy it from providers like us, even if you buy it as a service. But you need to do that in a combination of running traffic locally. You probably need to do it in the different ways in different markets. So I mean, it's going to be a hybrid anyway.
And Mattias, I think the other thing that's going to happen is, interestingly enough, I think for the service providers, as we move to these models where their assets are more distributed, in some cases outside of their direct control, it's going to change dramatically how you manage these environments. And I think you're going to see a big change in telco management tools and assets. I think you really have to reinvent those things to reflect the fact that, the old model of I'll call Sam, and Sam will go into the server room and reboot it, it is gone. And so I think, one of the places I know we're spending a lot of time is looking at all of our tool sets and how we manage these solutions, because it's going to change. And then I think you also have to think about things like, how do you connect together third-party reporting? So, someone like, use an example of Teams, they have a really strong set of tools around analytics, but then how do you bring their tool set and your own network tool set together so that you can see them both at the same time and understand what's happening based on seeing both versus seeing, having to go in a chair over here and look at one and then go in a chair over here and look at the other? How do you bring those together?
Yeah.
So I guess to bring this back to the idea of, so you're at a company, you've been told now we can give you some advice as you're going to end up with a hybrid solution in some way if you're buying UCaaS. Providers are going to probably offer you some sort of hybrid solution. But I guess sitting there as the end user company, you're still going to have some challenges, issues. What do we think those common stumbling blocks that these end user companies are going to have with their UCaaS solution are going to be?
Are you talking about the quality on the services being delivered, or like quality on voice and stuff like that?
Yeah,
or are we talking about?
I imagine a lot of people will have quality issues as sort of their first port of call, maybe interoperability and those kind of things. I guess what is the main thing you're hearing from your customers when they run into trouble? What are the issues that usually come up?
Yeah, but I mean, if you take the end user perspective, I think that what's really important for us, or for anyone to kind of deal with and understand, is that end users just want things to work. They want to be able to access the services from anywhere. I mean, just like when I'm streaming Netflix or listening to Spotify or checking my emails or whatever. So, I mean, I don't care about the technology behind it. I don't care how things are being run, whether it's run in a data center at my telco, or if it's a pure cloud services. So, I mean, that's the perspective I have as an end user, and I think it's really important for us as the delivering of the services to understand that we need to build the services in a way that makes it accessible and with a good quality, no matter how I access the services. So that's the starting point to have, and that's how you need to build the software as well, and also to build it in a way that you can access it in a mobile network or from home or from the office or anywhere. I mean, I as an end user should just care about whether I have internet access or not. That's the only thing I should care about as an end user, actually.
So really what we're talking about from a strategy perspective is getting and deploying a UCaaS solution that's incredibly flexible and is capable of responding to all of the network needs that your end users actually are going to be traveling through and traveling onto.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think it also kind of ties back to just thinking about this idea of strategy for a bit in terms of what you were saying, Greg, that, you know, as an end user, as someone who's dealing with end users on the platform, actually the customer service angle becomes one of the most important things, because the network will fail and there will be an outage, and, you know, your software will be able to tell you where it is and what's going on and all of that. But if you can't communicate that to your users who are having problems, then, you know, you start to have this really serious sort of degradation in service, I guess.
Yeah, and I think another area that you know, is important is to consider security as you move into these environments, because you know, probably the last 12 months we've never been more aware of the impact that you know, these global ransomware and hacking schemes have created. You know, for a long time, I think the telecom world always thought it was somewhat exempt, maybe, from these scenarios. But the reality is, you know, it's just a matter of time before it comes to you. And so I do think that our industry in general has to become more security conscious, and particularly as we move people out of the office, right? You know, it used to be that asset was in the office, the people were in the office. So to some extent, if you created a bubble around them, it was relatively secure. Now, neither the asset nor the people are in the office. So you really means you have to have robust security everywhere, because the number of threat vectors are greater. I think the other thing that people need to appreciate is that they're not just protecting against toll fraud when we talk about voice security. You also recognize this is another asset on the network. It's another way for a potential bad actor to find a way in, right? They may not necessarily be interested in listening to your conversations, but they may be interested in finding a way to take over your client or find a side door, a back door into your network because someone left a password of 1 2 3 4 on something, and use that, and they're out there.
Yep.
Use that as a way to get access to something that they really want. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how they got there. Once they're in, the damage will get done. So I think that's an area where anyone migrating, and frankly, even if you have a traditional PBX environment, you still should be thinking carefully about whether those voice assets or communication assets are protected.
So to wrap us off, and I think just to tie us back into the overall session title and give people a few sort of good takeaways, when we're thinking about someone who's deploying this UCaaS platform and they're trying to get the network set up specifically to work, and they're dealing with all these distributed workers now. I mean, what are the steps that they can take to make sure that network asset is robust in its responses to the requirements of UC?
Well, I mean, first of all, of course, when you have a software that is delivered to end customers as a cloud services, of course, you need to have a software that could adjust to bandwidth and stuff like that. I mean, our solution work with 3 different codecs depending on the bandwidth, and you can adjust on what kind of connectivity you have. But I think also our customers as service providers, what they need to think about is which options do we give our customers? Is the only option to deliver this as an IP solution with a soft phone or a web-based client or a desk phone, or do we also have the ability to deliver this as a fully integrated mobile solution as well? Because then you will always have the option to kind of communicate over the cell phone network with traditional calls, but still integrated with fixed telephony and mobile telephony into the world of the UCaaS and PBX. So give more than one highway, I would say, is probably better than trying to improve all of the alternatives of optimizing the network, because the network will always fail sometime.
Yep.
But if you have options, you can always choose the best option in the situation that you are there and then as an end customer.
Absolutely. And then that includes building a solution that can switch between, say, Wi-Fi and cellular and all those kind of things, and with inbuilt flexibility. Yeah. What do you think about that, Greg? Do you have anything else to add in?
I got 2 points, I think. One is, definitely depending on the type of business you have, you may be in mission critical environment. You're a hospital, some sort of an environment that can't go down. Certainly, you need to think about some sort of edge device. Things like Teams. There's a survivable branch appliance. Things like our SBCs, which have redundant WAN connections, and we have solutions locally that can act as a SIP registrar and keep devices alive. So I think that's important for a segment of the world. I think the other thing to think about is really, I think of it sort of like a hierarchy. There's the cloud, there's the WAN, there's the enterprise edge, and then there's the home or the remote environment. And the way I like to think about it is, you go down the stack, reliability inherently goes down. There's an awful lot more work being done to, say, manage the resiliency of the cloud and the WAN than there is to manage a home or remote environment. I mean, most people's home routers have some little, brick like this that serves as the power supply. That's a far cry from what Mattias probably spends on his infrastructure on a daily basis. So people like to kind of, there was an AWS outage for 2 hours, and that hits the news. But in a lot of regards, these kinds of things are really where a lot of reliability comes and goes from. And with that in mind, I think the thing that's kind of interesting going forward is that I think IT organizations really need to start thinking about how are they going to shift their spend for these remote workers. because, if you go into my office in Westford, there's a nice docking station there, 2 monitors, all kinds of infrastructure that was designed for me to work there. When I went to my house, it was like, oh, get what you want, right? Figure out how to do it. I think long term, IT is going to have to figure this out, because I think they need to figure out how do they invest in their employees' infrastructure so that those employees have a good experience, and when they engage with their customers, they have a good experience, right? What's the camera? What's the headset? I think that it's a struggle, right? I bet you there's people watching going, hey, I'm not going to buy $1,000 worth of stuff for someone's house. I don't even know if they're going to stay with the company. How do I get it back? But I think ultimately IT is going to have to come up with a model, because if they don't, then how are they going to support people? How are you going to support people when you call IT and every person in a 5,000 person company, they have a different one of these, and they got a different one of these.
Exactly.
I mean, how will you ever figure it out? So I think there's a whole multi-year process that's going to happen, where we come to some sort of an understanding of what's delivered to an employee for their remote environment.
Yeah.
And how is that managed, and how is it secured? All those pieces. I don't think we're there yet. I think that's another 3, 4, maybe 5 years away before that sort of codifies.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Things can just go wrong. I mean, take the lights in my room. I have no idea why they switched off, but they are.
I noticed
just goes wrong.
Finbarr, I thought you just didn't want to talk to us.
No, you just have to keep going with work however you can, even in the dark. But you do raise a valid point. I know from Cavell's own research, we've seen a rise in the number of companies who have started paying for home broadband for their employees, just to make sure they have a certain amount of bandwidth so they can guarantee the service will be somewhat reliable. I've seen a rise in the number of companies paying for cellular backup plugins for modems and things like that, just so that if the employee goes offline. And what some of the work we've been doing, which is quite interesting, is helping companies define on the X and Y axis, how critical is this employee? How much do they need to be online? What's your failure and risk tolerance for that employee? Like, do you need them to be online every single day, no matter what? In that case, you need a personalized Wi-Fi hub, a business broadband contract, and a cellular backup device for that home. Do you care if they're not online one day every week? If something goes wrong, okay, well then just let them have whatever broadband connection they have. So there's a lot of interesting discussions that are going to happen in that area, as well as companies, as you say, they need to decide what level of standardization they want to put out across their employee base, and how important it actually is in terms of missed days and risk to lost time for the company. Because I think a lot of people are going to realize when their IT department sits down that 30-40% of their company isn't super risk tolerant. They can afford to lose workers here and there to avoid spending, as you say, £1,000 a person. I think that's quite interesting.
And also, I mean, it's as Greg says, when it comes to the security part. But I mean, because what people do when it doesn't work at home is that they run down to like Starbucks, for example, and then I've heard some quite sensitive conversations going on in cafes and stuff as well, and break it down to security. I mean, you're probably right there, Finbarr.
There's a load of policy changes potentially as well, in terms of if your security fails, no, you're not allowed to leave the house and work somewhere else. You have to stop working on those documents until your home network is fixed. So many interesting conversations, and we are going to have to leave those questions and conversations to another panel in the future, as we are unfortunately out of time. So I'm sure if you have follow-up questions about any of these interesting areas, you could of course get in touch with me or either of our panelists today. And thank you again, Mattias and Greg, for sitting down to talk to me today.